Good evening all, I am Deepti Sharma with the Tues edition of South Asian News, Vision of Asia. We are coming to you from our studio in New York City. Welcome to the show. Let's begin the episode taking a look at the coronavirus pandemic and its impact. Globally, we are looking at more than 91 million cases of COVID-19 with nearly 2 million deaths. In the United States, we are at 22.7 million coronavirus cases with more than 376,000 deaths. The nation is ravaging with coronavirus cases, hitting record numbers of deaths as well as hospitalizations. The country has averaged more than 3,000 COVID-19 deaths per day for the past week, with more than 200,000 new infections. The state of California is the current epicenter and is struggling with the surge that is overwhelming hospitals and forcing them to ration care and beds. On the vaccine, the government is asking states to speed up the COVID-19 vaccinations to people over the age of 65 and others at risk instead of holding back vaccines for a second dose. More than 9 million people have received the COVID-19 vaccine's first dose out of more than 27 million vaccine doses distributed in the country so far. Meanwhile, in politics, which is a huge focus for our episode tonight, the House, controlled by Democrats, plans to vote as soon as tomorrow on an article of impeachment charging President Trump with inciting insurrection in the Capitol last week. President-elect Joe Biden is continuing his transition process and is set for his inauguration day next week on January 20th, where law enforcement agency will be on high alert due to armed protests being planned around the country on the day of the inauguration. So where are we headed after a mob of domestic terrorists attacked the Capitol, and what has been the overwhelming response to this coup that we saw last week? We have tonight activists, local officials, and political commentators. Here are the headlines. Political commentator Pallavi Purkayastha reacts to Capitol mob, riots, and Senate runoff, Georgia. Black Lives Matter Greater New York frustrated over police response to pro-Trump mob featuring Chivona Newsome. Deepti Sharma on empathy, equality, and action, candidate for New York City Council District 24th, Queens, New York. Time for a short break on Vision of Asia South Asian News segment. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I am Deepti Sharma, and this is Vision of Asia Tuesday night episode of South Asian News. We continue to reflect tonight about last week's mob attack at the Capitol. A fiery debate opened in the U.S. House of Representatives today over a Democratic-led effort to remove President Donald Trump from office for inciting the supporters who stormed the Capitol, while the president has denied any wrongdoing. The claim is that President Trump's false allegations of an election fraud without proof has enraged pro-Trump supporters and prompted the violence in Washington that killed 5, including a police officer. The House plans to vote tomorrow on an article of impeachment charging President Trump with inciting insurrection unless he resigns or Vice President Mike Pence moves to oust him under provision of the U.S. Constitution invoking the 25th Amendment. Meanwhile, the insurrection happened on the same day the Democrats won the much-anticipated Senate runoff in Georgia, with Jon Ossoff and Reverend Raphael Warnock becoming the first Democrats elected to the Senate from Georgia in 2 decades, completely changing Georgia to a move blue state. Bringing more insight into this Senate runoff's impact with comments on last week's deadly mob attack at the Capitol, we spoke with political strategist and commentator Pallavi Purkayastha. Here is Pallavi. Could you respond to last Wednesday's event that happened at the Capitol? How did that make you feel? And politically, how did that look for you?
That's definitely a very loaded question. I watched it unfurl as it happened. I had CNN on. I watched Secret Service come in, grab Mike Pence and take him away. And then I watched Capitol Police come in and ask people to start hunkering down. My very first reaction was comparing that to the BLM protests that happened throughout not just this past year, but really when the movement started. We've seen instances where as soon as there is some kind of just ad about BLM protests happening, before a single protester can get to that spot, we have police and military and tanks and helicopters, just everything ready to go. And compared to that, we've been seeing for days on Twitter and Parler and Facebook, people, Trump supporters, really, I don't want to parse words, Trump supporters coming out and saying that they wanted to storm the Capitol, they wanted to overthrow the government, and we saw this complete lack of preparation. On one hand, I am extremely thankful that no member of Congress, no Republican, no Democrat, no staff got hurt, but on the other side, it feels like sheer luck. It feels like complete dumb luck that they weren't able to get to the people that they really wanted to get to, and I don't even want to think about what could have happened if they got their hands on AOC or Nancy Pelosi or Mike Pence, who they wanted to hang. So I'm personally still pretty shaken up about it. I know people who work as staff. I'm friends with a few lawmakers. The entire time that we couldn't get in touch with them, I was extremely worried about their safety. And politically, it really amazes me in a bad way that now I have to worry about the safety of my friends who work at state capitals. I was a staffer at the Georgia State Capitol for 3 years. And knowing that the people who are walking in today to pass laws and pass bills and debate the way government is supposed to do, the fact that they have to be surrounded by protection and by tanks and police officers, it really shakes me in a pretty bad way.
Pallavi, what were these staffers' experience at the Capitol, if you can share some?
I won't go too into details because this is not something that I told them that I would share publicly, but people were definitely scared. They were scared for their lives. They could hear the mob. They knew that there was at one point just one door. I got chills just saying that out loud, that there was just one door separating them. The mob got into the Capitol. The time where the Capitol Police ended up shooting one of the members of the mob who was trying to get into the door. That was the last barricade. They were hunkered down in that room. So they were scared. A lot of them are still shaken up. I am immensely proud of them for going back and doing their jobs, because I simply don't know if I would have been able to do that. But they were scared, and they shouldn't be scared. Going into the U.S. Capitol and serving as staff for a congressman or for a senator, this should not be a scary job. It's already a very, very high stress and sometimes low paying job. And people who do it really do it because they want to serve the community. And the fact that they were afraid for their lives really says something about who we have become as a country.
I have to ask you about January 6th again. I know it was a really difficult day on all of us at the Capitol, but it was a day of celebration for Democrats in Georgia with the Senate runoff. I know you worked really closely with both the campaigns for the Democrats that were running, Jon Ossoff and Reverend Warnock. Tell me about how that Senate runoff was after the presidential elections, and what did you all focus on in order to get these votes?
Yeah, I was hoping that we would get some more time to celebrate. The election happened January 5th, and then it seemed like hours later when we were just starting to celebrate because the numbers had finally come in. We were watching the scene just unfurl at the Capitol. I would like to thank you for asking that. I would like to take us back a few days and into a kind of a more of a joyous occasion. It didn't happen overnight. If you look at Georgia, if you look at the way our elections have happened, though not this past presidential election, but the one before, we lost by I believe 10 points, and then Hillary lost by 5 points. So we've been closing the gap every single election cycle, and hasn't happened by chance. You look at Stacey Abrams and just the organization that she has put into the state over the past decade. We've had just increased amounts of voter registration. We had a law passed recently that says that anytime you have any kind of interaction with a government agency, you get registered to vote. That's helped our voter registration go through the roof. And then you have these organizations who've just done an amazing job of going out there and making sure that people come out to vote. If there was one group that I could really give credit to, it would be the groups that have really focused on Black voter participation, especially in rural Georgia. Looking at those numbers, it was it was just this moment of like, aha, we did it. But looking at those numbers, you look at the numbers of Asian Americans who went out and voted. It really showed that if you go out and talk to people who have been disenfranchised, or they're apathetic because no one's ever talked to them, it really showed us that that kind of work is what does it in the end. It also helped that, that was the time where Trump came out and kept talking about how the election was rigged and how it didn't matter and how he got cheated. And I think his tantrums ended up contributing to a suppressed turnout from the Republican side. Because, I don't blame them at the end of the day if someone keeps telling you over and over and over again that their vote didn't count. Why go out and vote again? So it was everything kind of going right for us. It was amazing minority participation. It was Republicans kind of shooting themselves in the foot. It was two really, really good candidates. If you look at the fact that we have a Black pastor as well as a Jewish journalist, John Ossoff, who I consider a friend, is 33 years old. He's my age. The fact that the millennials kind of, they did their TikToks, but they felt heard. And people go out and they vote when they feel like they have something going on for them, and they have something at stake. And we just had everything just went the right way for us. And I'm really, really glad. I'm really proud of us that we capitalized on that.
More on the attack on the Capitol by pro-Trump mob and its impact nationwide. Black Lives Matter movement is pointing to the difference in how law enforcement dealt with the act of domestic terrorism by the mob at the Capitol versus the mostly peaceful protests against racism and police brutality that we all saw across the nation since the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis last year. The movement is saying that the contrast between the restrained police at the Capitol last week versus how aggressively and violently police responded to Black Lives Matter has been stark as well as frustrating. Many are saying that the mob attack last week and the lack of law enforcement towards a mostly white pro-Trump rioters has showcased again the deep-rooted systemic racism against communities of color in the United States. On this, the Black Lives Matter Greater New York has expressed much frustration and dismay on the treatment from the police towards the mob, as last year Black Lives Matter demonstrators encountered militarized warrior cops, tear gas, rubber bullets, batons, and much more in their protests. We spoke with co-founder of Black Lives Matter Greater New York, Chivona Newsome, who called for President Trump's removal from the office and accountability of law enforcement. Here is Chivona Newsome. I'd like for you to respond to what happened last Wednesday at the Capitol as a civilian, as a member of the community, as a leader, as an activist. How did that make you feel?
Above all things, I am an American. My ancestors have been here for hundreds of years, although they were brought by force. It was an act of domestic terrorism. It was actually really frightening from anyone, no matter race, creed, or religion, to see people so easily trample over the American infrastructure. Imagine that they were foreign terrorists. The people who violated and invaded the United States Capitol, they need to be held accountable.
Yes, for sure. Let's go into the stark differences we have seen on the treatment that was done to protesters last year as compared to what happened last week. My first question to you has to be, do you look at what happened last week as a protest at all?
Absolutely not. As soon as I saw it, it was absolute domestic terrorists. As you can see of the reports that have come out of our law enforcement agencies on a federal level, white supremacists are the biggest threat to our American society. We don't bring weapons to protests. We don't bring Molotov cocktails. And honestly, with the police presence that we have surrounding any of our demonstrations, we wouldn't even be capable of breaching the barricades. And a report that came out today by the FBI states that they knew violence would occur the next day. So the system failed on so many levels, from the executive level of Donald Trump to down to law enforcement, to Capitol Police, who opened up barricades and allowed terrorists to walk right in and put lawmakers' lives in jeopardy. But not only that, it was the significance of the day that was chosen. It was the certification of the Electoral College to officially make Joe Biden our president-elect. These people tried to stop democracy. It was an absolute coup, and they need to be charged with those big words coming out of the Constitution: treason, sedition, and insurrection. They're enemies of the state.
Chivona, you were in Minneapolis after the death of George Floyd. You saw from your own eyes what the reaction was of everyone. I want you to discuss with me how the police at that time treated all of you demonstrators that were asking for an end to racism.
We were treated as enemy combatants. If you look at photos from any of the marches from Minneapolis to New York to Georgia to the places where we have rallied in protest, officers are militarized. At some point, federal agents were on the ground. We were treated as if it was a war being fought here in America. I've been tear gassed, hit with pepper balls, arrested, slammed to the ground. I've been beaten with batons. So for no one to stop these domestic terrorists, it just reinforces everything that we believe in, that America is filled with white supremacy and law enforcement are enforcers of white supremacy. As we see with even firemen are being investigated on what happened. So the people who were out there, they're people you encounter in your everyday life. We had lawmakers. This is very scary. What we're seeing is the unstabilizing of the American government. This is how a coup begins. And this is why Donald Trump needs to be removed immediately, because he poses an imminent threat to American society. And as you can see by the terrorists that he leads, the white supremacists, something needs to be done, and something swift.
Chivona, Black Lives Matter Greater New York has been continuously protesting even past the summer. I'd like to know what these police officers and other law enforcement say to you guys when you are protesting. I know in New York you have done a lot of protests. What is the reaction to you guys particularly, and what is the conversation like?
We're met with anger and hostility. We've been invited to fight at any opportunity. They don't even give us due process. Say there's a system in place when people are supposed to get arrested at a rally, allow recording plays. It tells people to clear the streets or the police will move in. Most of the time, the police do not even play that sound. If they do, they are attacking you in military formation. My back still isn't good when we shut down the George Washington Bridge. They don't care if you're a woman or a child. If you're doing anything regarding Black lives, you are in harm's way when you are out there with nothing more than a bullhorn and a piece of paper saying, "We're here, we're fighting, all power to the people." Now, to see that violent men carrying bombs and guns, and we've seen this repeatedly. When we first seen the shutdown happen, white armed men went to state capitals, made threats against lawmakers, and they protested there. These are not protests. And I find it highly offensive if anyone would compare that domestic terrorism to what we do, actively fighting for racial equity.
Stand for the short break on Vision of Asia, Voice of the Community. We'll be right back. And welcome back. I am Deepti Sharma, and this is Vision of Asia, South Asian news segment. Now let's take a look at a special election for New York City Council in District 24th of Queens on February 2nd. This is the first of its kind ranked choice voting election where the voters will get a chance to rank their top 5 candidates in an order of preference. We have tonight our conversation with one of the candidates running in the special election of New York City Council, Deepti Sharma. A proud South Asian American and a small business owner, Deepti Sharma is running on making Queens more sustainable and accessible for communities that are vulnerable or have been ignored. Deepti wants to build stronger communities for all in Queens and brings with her experience on the front line of COVID-19 pandemic and its catastrophic impact on New York City. She's also led grassroots efforts to tackle the great issue of food insecurity in the city and hopes to bring economic, racial, and housing justice to hard-hit individuals and families in District 24th. Her motto is empathy, quality, action, and she's urging all to exercise their right to vote in the special election on February 2nd. Here is our conversation with Deepti Sharma, candidate running for New York City Council in District 24. Just beginning this interview, before we go into your candidacy for New York City Council, I have to ask you a question. I would like for you as a community leader to respond to what happened last week at the Capitol. You're somebody who's running for council. If you were elected in it, this is something that we would be discussing as well. What are your responses to what happened with the mob attack?
I mean, it was scary. It was scary to witness something like that happening in this country. You know, our family and our communities came to this country because we didn't think that we would have to be so worried about every single moment that our safety was under attack. And now it feels like nothing is safe. Nowhere you go, no matter what you do, you feel like you're always a target. And the fact that people were doing whatever they wanted, it was scary, so I think my initial reaction was shock, but it felt as if it was something that has been brewing for a while. This presidency that Donald Trump has created, and he's allowed for this to continue. He's allowed for people to do whatever they want and for white supremacy to be normalized. It is not okay that there were people wearing Camp Auschwitz shirts. The Holocaust happened. 6 million Jews were killed. And the fact that there are people running around with Confederate flags, none of this is okay. It is scary, it is shocking, but also what we have to understand is this is the America we live in. So we shouldn't be shocked by it. What we need to do is understand that it is the America we live in and that we need to change it. We need to make sure that this is an America that accepts people from all over the place. This is the America that we want to build, past. I can't believe that we're still, we still have people walking around with the Confederate flag and trying to defend it. It's just it's an unfortunate situation, but it is why it's so important that we make sure that we don't just pay attention to what's happening on a federal level, on a national level, but what's happening within our local politics, what's happening in your city, what's happening in your state. Those things have an even bigger impact. When you elect the right leaders, they will be the ones that will help manage how you access healthcare. They're also the same people that will help understand what's happening with your budget in your city. Right. So I think it's even more important and even more eye-awakening. No matter how exhausted you are of what's happening nationally, pay attention to what's happening locally.
What should be the local and state response to this? We're hearing about more of these demonstrations to come as soon as we get closer to the inauguration. You're somebody that's running on the local level. What do you think needs to be done?
Well, we need more of our community leaders to step up, right? We need next year in city council, we're going to be electing 35 new city council members. Wow. There's 51 city council members right now, right? And 51 that represent all of New York City. We're going to be electing 35. Imagine what the impact will be of 35 new elected officials in New York City politics alone. And we're also electing a new mayor. So I think the most important thing that we can do is pay attention to the people that are running for office right now, because in the next year, they are going to be the people representing you. They are going to be the people that are going to make decisions on what happens with our city's budget. So I think more important than anything else is paying attention to what's happening in your neighborhood, on your block, in your community, because that is what's going to be essentially what's going to affect your life. And, as we get closer to the inauguration, we can't just keep remembering that we have to protect our Congress and our Senate. We also have to protect our local politics. And again, I just keep bringing it back to local, because you have to understand how important every single vote matters.
Well, this is all for our show tonight. Please send us your suggestions and get your voices and organizations on our show. Email us on events@itvgold.com or follow us on Facebook @itvgold. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel for free access to many of our popular shows. Thank you for joining us tonight from Queens, New York. This is Vision of Asia, and I am Aditi Lamba. Take care and be well.